This is the Other 22 Hours podcast. Hey, and welcome to this week's episode of the Other 22 Hours podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Shafer-Haiss.
And I'm your host, Michaela Anne. Thank you so much for being here.
We like to think of ourselves as the anti-album cycle podcast. So we're not like a normal music interview show where people are going to come on and talk about their latest record. We're going to ask all the questions about what we as musicians do off stage, usually outside of the public eye, and some of the tools and routines that we use to stay creative, stay inspired, and stay sane while we're trying to do something pretty crazy, which is build a career around our art.
Between the two of us, Aaron and I have almost 25 years of experience in the music business in all different avenues and sections.
And through a lot of failure, we've learned that there's not one right way to build a career around your passion.
And in an industry where so much feels out of our control and left up to luck, depending on who you know, being in the right place at the right time, we wanted to have conversations focusing on what is within our control.
And so with that in mind, we decided to invite some of our friends and some of our favorite artists on and ask them the question, what do you do to build sustainability in your life so that you can sustain your creativity? That friend today is actually a new friend, and that is MC Taylor, better known as Hiss Golden Messenger.
MC has been touring for the past 30 plus years, I think he said, starting out in punk rock bands.
Bought his first tour van at 17.
Yeah, wow. And started Hiss Golden Messenger in 2007, has been putting out records ever since independently and with Merge Records. He was nominated for Best Americana Album in 2019 for his record Terms of Surrender.
And through all of this, he says that he really just started focusing on his career in 2018. So that's a pretty great record.
Yeah. We covered a lot of different topics, from being gentle on yourself and accepting of your current creative process, the important physical and mental benefits of exercise and taking care of your body.
And we talked about one of my favorite things, learning through failure and through wrong decisions. And then also, I would like to pat ourselves on the back because we do talk about the Grateful Dead in this episode, and we didn't fall into only talking about the Grateful Dead the whole time. So have no fear, we are not a Grateful Dead podcast. We didn't fall victim to that.
We did talk about them for quite a while, but I found it very interesting, and I'm not a hardcore Deadhead.
We're still working on it.
Anyways.
In a really meta version of this podcast, you get to see the other 22 hours in action as our conversation gets cut short. MC was talking to us via his phone, which just promptly died kind of at a really beautiful moment in the conversation. But it ends very abruptly, and you get to hear Michaela and I try to right the ship. So sorry for the abruptness, but this is a real life podcast.
Without further ado, here is MC Taylor from Hiss Golden Messenger. Thank you for being here. Welcome.
Sure. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, we were just going to jump right in. We were talking about inviting you on and the fact that we have a lot of our guests so far have been people that we know, and we have never met you in person.
Yeah, hey.
Hi.
Good to meet you.
Good to meet you guys.
Lots of mutual friends. But one of the questions right off the bat, because this podcast is motivated by our goal and intent of trying to pull the curtain back a little bit on what life as professional musicians, as creative beings is really like. And a lot of creating or growing a music career can be built on this idea of developing this image. Mm-hmm. And some artists and bands are much more particular about how they present themselves on social media. It might be a bit more curated. And being a fan of yours and following your social media for a while, you present pretty honestly. You know, from not knowing you personally, it comes off like you're pretty revealing and forthcoming about how you feel about things, what the reality of touring can be, which really attracted us to wanting you as a guest. So I kind of wanted to start there and say, was that a intentional thought on your part, or is that just you don't know any other way to be?
It's me that's doing the posting. It's a tricky thing thinking about this because it sort of makes me think about our relationship to social media and how liberating it started out feeling 10 or 15 years ago and how confining it feels now, actually. I feel like I've really cut way back, actually, on my presence on Instagram now. I haven't been on Facebook in years and years, and I'm not on Twitter anymore either. And I'm too old to join any new social media places. So I think this is it for me. If I'm gonna post stuff that's personal out into the world for people that I don't know, it generally feels like, I don't think that transparent is the word, but just, I should just say what I want to say. And
Yeah.
it's kind of like let the cards fall, however.
Yeah, and I want to differentiate between revealing personal stuff on social media. Like, you're not live streaming your family and talking about, your relationships with your kids and your partner. And you come off real in how you communicate your thoughts on what's going on in the world, or the reality of the finances of touring with a band solo, that I think not everyone is comfortable with, because especially in the last couple years, it was such a huge thing for some bigger bands to reveal, like, we're canceling this tour because we're going to lose too much money.
Right.
And other bands will cancel a tour due to unforeseen circumstances. And you might then hear behind the scenes from knowing them, oh, it's because we were going to lose too much money. But they didn't want to reveal that reason.
I feel like everybody has a different way that they negotiate that. I certainly don't feel, as a fan of any band that might be canceling or struggling to like put all the pieces in place, I don't feel owed that kind of transparency. That seems to be a thing that is endemic of where we are right now. And this social media has pushed us into these spaces. I don't know. I mean, I like the transparency. I think it's good and interesting, but at the same time, I don't feel like anyone should be obligated to discuss stuff that is the nuts and bolts of making a music career work. I mean, I think the one thing we can all agree on is that it's pretty fucking impossible. There are lots of ways to make it work, and I've made it work, but the way I've made it work actually is just putting one tiny little piece in front of the next for, I bought my first tour band 30 years ago. It's like I was 17 years old. So I don't know. It's hard. And it's easy as an artist. The more you expose yourself to people talking on social media, it's easy to start to feel either undervalued or confused about how to make it work.
Yeah, absolutely. And a continuation of what Michaela was saying, I agree with you. I don't think everybody's entitled to run their business or their social media presence however they see fit for what they want to do. The other side of the coin with that is we've noticed it makes a lot of people feel like what they're experiencing with their career or their struggles in the music business is unique to them. I'm not going to do this tour because I'm going to lose $55,000. It's a bit of refreshing. And all of the large majority of our listeners are musicians in varying stages of their career. So that was part of the impetus to start this, was to be like, just build some community around the fact that, like, it doesn't matter if you're selling out the Beacon Theater or you're selling 20 tickets at the Basement here in Nashville. There's a lot of struggles
on every level.
There's a lot of parallels for everybody.
Oh my God, no doubt. Yeah, it's tricky. But like the place that I am coming from, and it's wild how deeply embedded this time period is in my DNA, but I grew up playing like punk rock and hardcore music, and there was no such thing as a career. Never even crossed my mind for the first, 10 or 15 years that I even was climbing into a tour van, unpacking my instruments and my amplifiers. Even when I was deep in it and giving everything of myself to it, it never crossed my mind that it would be a career. I was just doing it because it was fun and it was the thing that I felt most connected to in the universe. It is interesting, like, I have so many people in my life who went to music school. Did you guys go to music school?
We did.
Right. So like we're coming at this from different angles. We have similar hopes. But I think that when you come at it from a music school angle, sometimes it seems like a more legitimate pathway than I ever thought it was. So if you come out of music school with massive student debt and are expecting to follow this pathway, it's so unpredictable. It's almost unlike, in a lot of ways, any other degree you could get. I mean,
oh my God.
Then I like think about that, and I think about any degree is like what that degree looks like when you're out of school. It's much different than what you're imagining it's going to be when you're going in. So I never had this idea of like, I have all these skills, I don't know how to read music. All this stuff that I do with His Gold Messenger, this is why it has taken so long, is I learned how to do it from making a ton of bad choices and like being open enough, I guess, sometimes to be like, oh, wait, that doesn't work at all, actually. That's not how you run a band. That's not how you behave on a stage. That's not how you like break up an 8-hour drive from here to here. That's not how you deal with taxes.
Oh, yeah.
Every single little bit of my life and music really has been me learning through making a terrible choice and then having to try again the next time or the next year or the next fiscal year or the next tax season.
So you said that you came out the gates just wanting to play music and wanted to keep doing that. When did it switch to and I guess how did it switch to understanding that you were running a business? Did you kind of have the realization like, oh, wow, I'm making a living at this. I should figure out how to do this better? Or was it like, man, this is really hard. I wonder if there are things that I can do on the business end that would make this a little bit more sustainable?
When did that happen? Probably like a year ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, it's a good question because, there are a lot of ways to like take the temperature of where your career is at. But I will say probably, unfortunately, but maybe fortunately, actually, that temperature is rarely taken on a creative level. I played music for a really long time, but was a pretty shitty songwriter. I was a pretty shitty singer, bad at playing guitar. But over time, as you like flex those muscles, you figure out like what your workout routine is. I got to a point maybe, what year are we in, 2023? Like I got to a point maybe 12, 13, 14 years ago where I had the confidence, and I still like carry this confidence, this creative confidence to know that like I'm a good songwriter. I mean, what I do is specific, and I'm not doing anything that a million other people haven't done, but I know that I can do this thing that taps into a certain vulnerability that I think is absolutely a baseline requirement to any creative endeavor. Like, I know I have that thing. If I really put my mind to it, I can write 12 of those things and I can make a record. And anybody that is an artist and is making a living is like struggling with how to compartmentalize your creativity and then the like business part of it, right? That's the part that's so hard. I started to sharpen that side of my thing when I started having to deal with tax bills that felt pretty massive.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I was like, that wasn't the main thing, but that was one thing that was like this, Mike, you got to get your shit together, because not that I wasn't putting money aside for taxes, but it was more like not knowing what's the tax bill going to be this year. Was I operating at a loss? So am I going to not have a tax bill, or am I going to have a $50,000 tax bill? There were literally a couple years where that was a question in my head. And then I was thinking like, wait a second, there's a whole universe of people that can help you deal with this stuff, right?
Yeah. Where did you go when you were like, I need to get my shit together? Where were your resources?
I mean, at that point, I was working with my manager, who I started working with in 2018. His name is Brian Schwartz, and he owns a management company called 7S. Great dude, great friend. He has had a lot to do with, I said that my career has been taking tiny steps for a really long time, and Brian helped me make each of those steps a little bigger. By the time we'd been working together for a little bit, maybe a year or two, I was like, Brian, I need help with how to deal with stuff like taxes so that I'm not going into panic mode every March as people start talking about taxes.
Yeah.
Which we did. We just got through this tax season, and now I'm kind of like, who gives a shit? Because I just have my method, and I can't help but think about how Donald Trump paid $600 in taxes.
Yeah. There's so many things to be angry about, but
but it's funny, like during tax season, for some reason, that figure is always running around in my head.
yeah, the bookkeeping, data, all of that stuff is something that comes up a lot in these conversations, because I was never someone who liked spreadsheets or numbers, or that part felt so daunting to me. And now I've grown to really find comfort in my like tour budgets.
Yeah.
Every time I'm planning a tour, I have my Google sheet. I have an idea of what I potentially will make or lose. And then, you know, our taxes, I actually like doing my taxes now, which is so weird. I used to dread it. And now I'm like, ooh, I can't wait to do all my spreadsheets. Like,
Yeah, I mean, my methods are pretty primitive still, and I also despise that part.
yeah. Yeah. I think just the knowledge can help
Oh,
me
man.
feel more comfortable with just existing.
No doubt. Just the knowledge is like, it can be a real balm when there's so much about being a creative person for a living that makes no sense or is so unpredictable. You could hire the best publicist in the business and you could have not a single thing written about your record. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's just like everything is like walking into a casino.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really actually why I feel like the one guarantee in being a creative person is your relationship to your creativity. I find that I'm at my happiest, my calmest when I'm really like sunk into my creativity. And if I drift away from my creative process for too long, or if I drift away too far, I start to feel it, and it actually manifests in all kinds of ways. It can even be physical. I think it's just my brain needing what are they, endorphins? The happy making chemicals that come from being in a place that is productive and satisfying to the person. For me, that's making music.
Yeah, absolutely. My progression has been 15 years on the road with a ton of different bands, just being a sideman, and somebody called, be like, hey, I have this tour, this is the budget. And I'm like, great, cool. Jumping from van to van.
Yep.
And now I spend most of my time producing records and all that. So it's kind of more have my own business in a way. And getting the business end together for me, I've set up my systems now. They're running and I'm like, cool, that's handled for keeping track of everything. But the headspace that has cleared up is incredible. I'm like, oh, wow, there was actually like a lot of tension and a lot of just fog and dissonance before. The tension and release on all of it was really nice.
Yeah.
Which it's another conversation we have on here frequently that I'm a big fan of, is like getting things set, systems or whatever, routines or practices, so that you can show up and be creative more easily, more frequently. And it sounds like that's what you were just talking about as well.
I definitely have my systems. I have my things that I need to be in place. I think I'm realizing as I get older that I have some OCD tendencies, and I need to thread those, because sometimes that can then be me saying I need to get everything all done before I allow myself to be creative. And that is this way for my brain to distract itself and not let me get into the very pleasurable but very hard work of being creative, right? Because it's like you're torquing your brain to make something that feels fresh and to go to these places that can push on certain things that can feel uncomfortable. And sometimes my like OCD-ness is like, you can see my little studio space right now. You're not possibly going to write anything good or interesting until this whole space is cleaned up.
Yeah, I do that with my office, but it's been like my office hasn't been clean since we moved into this house 8 years ago.
Yeah, right.
That's my constant, like, once I organize, then I can write a great song.
Yeah. Sometimes that's true. Sometimes that's not true.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hear you. I fall into the same thing where I feel like I'm making progress towards being creative because I'm like, oh, I need to get this set and I need to get this set and I'm just doing tasks. And it's just all these tasks, and then all of a sudden I don't have time to actually be creative, and then it just starts all over again. So one thing I've been trying to focus on is what is good enough.
Yeah.
Which just saying that kind of gives me a little bit of anxiety. I'm like, well, that's just settling. But kind of define it for myself. Like, I don't need to really get everything totally set. Like, what are the specific things? Are there things that you've identified that are like kind of priorities that need to be checked, whether it's exercising or meditating or
How you have to caretake yourself.
Yeah, or like making sure all your cables are curled up. We're sitting in my studio. I do that often.
Yeah, I mean, I need to the house has to be vacuumed.
Yeah, totally.
No, my creative process is a little tidal in that there will be times when there's a lot of energy pushing forward. And then there are times when like the tide is ebbing a little bit. And that's where I'm kind of, to the outsider, it looks like I'm just puttering, which I am. Like I might pick up a guitar and like fuck around for a couple minutes. But last year, Hiss was super busy. We were on the road a ton, maybe more than we should have been. And then right at the tail end of all those shows, like I feel like we did almost 100 shows, which is with travel and stuff. That's a lot. And then right at the tail end of that, we went down to Texas and made a record. And the record is done. It's coming out this August. So like we're right in the spot where, or I'm right in the spot where I'm really just kind of shepherding all the pieces forward with the help of my management, my booking agent, my record label. Like we're just, you know how it goes when you put a record out. You just are kind of like moving the pieces forward. You have the photos, the art. Do you have support for the tours? All that stuff.
Yeah.
I feel like I've learned to go a little easier on myself creatively. Like I'll mess around with stuff. Like I was just down in Florida for a couple days with Ifo Donovan, who's a good buddy, and writing songs together for something. Not entirely sure what it'll be, but our rapport is good. And like, I think our musical skill sets complement each other, but I don't think of myself as necessarily writing for a Hiss record. In a couple days, I'm going out to LA for a week just to write with people, but not for Hiss, just someone is needing some kind of song, or maybe I write a song with someone that could get placed somewhere else. That's creative work that I really like, that I might not have been up for 15 years ago. But just my songwriting practice is such at this point in my life that I'm not super precious about songwriting. It doesn't need to be all about me. I like the challenge of stepping into a scenario and someone being like, I want to write, I don't know what, something that is not necessarily my wheelhouse, and me just being like, I don't know, let's give it a shot and see. I don't know. Let's see if we can come up with something. I mean, like, great music is all about great melody, right? So whatever genre someone wants to work in, ultimately, I hear that as help me write melody. Melody is, I'm chasing that all the time. That's like my primary focus. Now that I like understand how important melody is to the cosmos, that's all I'm chasing. And like when we're making a new Hiss record, my like primary directive to everybody is just find fucking melodies everywhere.
Yeah.
You know, just like as much melody, harmony. We can always take it away if it sounds like someone just threw up all over the song. But like, you know what I mean? It's just like melody makes the world move. I forget where we started with that question.
No, that's a great place to be. I was kind of raised on the Grateful Dead and didn't.
Oh, geez.
I know.
Oh, jeez.
But we're not going to go there. Just
no, let's go there. Michaela, do you like the Grateful Dead?
My relationship with the Grateful Dead is that I didn't know who they were probably until I met Aaron in jazz school when we were in college. And then I fell into hanging out with all of these musician guys who loved the Grateful Dead. And I was into musical theater and pop country and old jazz and like 90s R&B. And so Grateful Dead, jam bands, I didn't know anything about them. And we played music, you know, my early 20s in New York City with all these guys that loved the Grateful Dead. And I have a very vivid memory of our friend Thomas Brian Eaton. We were playing a wedding gig and had a 2-hour drive. His mission was to make me love the Grateful Dead. And he played me like some live concert from 1970 something. He was telling me all this information. And the harmonies were so terrible that I just kept being like, dude, this is the worst thing to try and play me because I can't even hear the songs.
All right.
That said, they're recorded records. There are some songs and melodies that I love, but I am not well versed enough, and it was not love at first listen for me.
Yeah. Where I was coming
understand.
from was realizing not too long after this period that Michaela was just talking about how all of the Grateful Dead's music is entirely based on melodies.
Jerry Garcia his melodic sense was very deep.
Yeah, absolutely. And then when you're talking about American folk music, you're talking about like fiddle tunes and like that whole lineage. That's all like an oral music, so it's all passed on from singing melodies. And I mean, you go to an old time jam and it's 9,000 melodies happening on top of each other and variations and all of that.
Yeah,
I agree.
yeah.
I hear it the same way. I hear rhythmic melodies, I hear harmonic melodies, like all of that.
Yeah.
Kind of making a fabric. So
Wait, but I want to know what your feelings are on the Grateful Dead.
I love them to death. I would be hard pressed to think of another band that occupies such a wide swath of my emotional core. They're also my favorite band to make fun of because I love them. I love them so much. But when I was growing up, and as I mentioned a little bit back, I was a punk rock and hardcore person, and that world of music didn't understand and therefore didn't care for the Grateful Dead. And there's this Grateful Dead box set that came out a couple of years ago, and they asked me to write the foreword to this thing. So I was writing about this then, just the fact, without even knowing what they sounded like, I was just like, I don't like the Grateful Dead. I don't like their crowd. I'm like into punk rock. And I remember there's a very well-known, in the punk rock world, a very well-known club in Berkeley called 924 Gilman Street. It's still there, actually. It's like an all-ages venue. And my punk rock band, the day that Jerry Garcia died, we were playing at this place. And my brother, who's 2 years younger than me and was into the Grateful Dead, he's also a musician. He just happened to tag along with my band when we were playing there. We were like so excited to play at this legendary place. This was a long time ago. This was like 30 years ago. Or no, it was whenever Jerry died, 95 or something
95.
like that. So my brother, being a Dead fan, he was like, Jerry Garcia died. I'm going to take the train into the city to go to the Haight-Ashbury and just see what the scene is. And we were just like, oh, why would you do that? He came back, he was like pretty shaken because people were so deeply moved and troubled about his death. But like over time, really not that much longer after that night, I felt like I outgrew the dogma of punk rock. I appreciate that music still, but for a genre that proudly flouts rules, there were a lot of rules, right? There were like rules about how you could dress and blah, 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 all that shit. So anyway, I just started like exploring. I was getting older, and I remember the first time I ever heard the Grateful Dead's music, I had to like take the tape out and be like, this is what they sound like? What I knew was the iconography and the skulls, and I thought the shit was going to be evil.
Oh, interesting.
I thought it was going to be like hard rock. I thought it was going to be like Black Sabbath.
Okay.
Oh.
But they were just so deep. And I played in Phil Lesch's band for a couple shows a year or two ago. And just like being on that stage so close to him and hearing that sound, the sound that he makes, it's such a specific bass sound. It's such a specific tone, and really felt like touching the hem of the garment a little bit. Yeah, it's too deep to even really talk about in small segments.
Yeah.
It's like a joke in our friend circle of, because of me having no knowledge of them and the intensity of the love that the people I was hanging with had for them, like this was really intense. Like our friend Jeff, he's like a Grateful Dead encyclopedia. He could name every concert. It was so intense that I think it was overwhelming to me.
Yeah, of course.
But as I've gotten older, I'm like, the fact that a band can connect to so many people with that intensity of love and adoration for what they create, to the point that they are totally fine and forgiving of the worst shows that they've ever played, is a really incredible thing.
Right.
And that's how I feel about Lucinda Williams, for instance, because I love her songs and feel like I know her through her songs, that she can do no wrong. Her worst concert, I would still just love to sit through. So that's just an interesting observation of our relationship to music when I was not a fan and was introduced in this way via obsession. It was overwhelming, I think, for me. But then I had the same reaction you did of, that's what they sound like? I didn't think it was going to sound like Black Sabbath, but some of the songs that I did hear, like your cassette tape that you had, I was like, wow, this is way more beautiful than I thought this was going to be.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it really is a testament to just, there's something in the music that supersedes the technical performance of it, right? And the fact that people can feel that, people that are non-musicians can feel that is profound. Actually, it's like such a beautiful reminder of what I think music is supposed to do, which, you know, I don't really think that music is about chops. I think music is about like having a language for these really vulnerable, emotional places. And they were really good at that. I think the Grateful Dead's writing, Robert Hunter, his writing is, that shit is deep.
Yeah. And then also the way that Jerry was able to express that.
The
emotion that he's able to convey with his voice, from like pure joy to like anguish, all of that is, it's a really wide spectrum.
It's so interesting to think of in today's terms too, of like just the humanity that they showed in their performances, when today we're talking about AI creating songs and what's the future of artists now that we have AI that's going to write a song in any genre, you know, and create this pristine recording, versus hearing somebody perform a song that's full of emotion, but maybe they're a little pitchy at some points.
Yeah.
Now you guys are making me feel like I need to go do a deep dive on some Grateful Dead.
I got you. Let's do it. I've been
sounds like
you have a
Sherpa there that can help you.
I want to circle back to how you had mentioned like the dogma of hardcore music and punk rock, and not really even putting in a Dead cassette, because it wasn't that. We went to jazz school, totally saw that. It's like, this is not jazz. That's not good music. And to a big extent, you see that here in Nashville, the traditional country scene. You know, it's like, that's not country music, all of that. And I find that like really limiting. Yeah. Like you said, like songs are songs, music is music. The DNA is the same throughout here. Have you noticed that with other bands or other types of music that like you kind of were resistant to? Or was opening up to the Dead, did that open up the gates to being open to other stuff?
I mean, I think for whatever reason, I was pretty open to whatever. And I have been for a long time. I mean, of course, there have been moments in my life where I've been like, ew, oh, that stuff sucks. But I always feel a little lame when I do something like that, because that's not really like the kind of relationship I want to have with music. I'm always trying to, even to this day, because I'm still a really omnivorous musical listener. And, you know, I listen to stuff far outside the realm of, I never listen to songwriters, for instance, like, because I feel like I know that stuff. So, and I want to be around stuff that challenges me to understand how it was made or why someone would play that way. Or so I tend to listen to stuff that is really not the easiest to listen to sometimes, partially to like keep myself in this place where my like ears are wide open. I might be playing something and my wife will come home and be like, what is this? Can you please put something else on? And I understand. But I'm in a musical space 24 hours a day. I don't ever stop dealing with music in my head. I have music on, generally speaking, all the time. And I landed in this kind of world of songwriting, I guess, because it felt like where I could take whatever skills I had, and it felt genuine. Like when I perform a song in that style, it feels real, whatever real might mean. That feels important to me. Is like, if I'm going to do this, I want people to feel like I'm not putting a costume on. Even if I am putting a costume on, I want it to feel believable. But yeah, like my musical world as a listener is really broad.
Yeah. One thing I've struggled with coming from music school and all of that is like listening just for pleasure. I do, of course, but there's so much of the time I'm listening critically, and it's like, oh, how is this made? Or, oh, what's that? Or, oh, man, that's a really cool texture, or something like that. Am I picking up you listen the same way?
I mean, yeah. There's some stuff I'll put on, and it's just, I don't go too deeply on it. And other times I'm like, I gotta like move the needle back, and what is happening there? The more you get into the process of making records, I feel like the more that becomes part of how you listen, and it's not even like, that is pleasurable for me. Like
Yeah.
I like that part. I don't listen like I did when I was 15 years old, but that's okay. I was at the gym the other morning. We didn't talk about exercise. I wouldn't say I'm a gym rat, but when I'm home, I'm at the gym 6 days a week. So that's where I listen to a lot of music. And I was listening to this Public Enemy record. They were one of my faves when I was a young teen, a young little blonde-haired, blue-eyed white boy in Southern California, listening to Public Enemy, like It Takes a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back and Fear of a Black Planet. Those two records were really, they just loom very large in my musical world. And I remember vividly being so confused about how they made those records when I was first hearing them. I mean, literally, that's what I think kept me coming back, because there's other hip hop from that time period that is much easier on the ears. Those productions by that production team that made those records are called it's called the Bomb Squad, are noisy. It's like klaxon sirens and like insane layers. And I just remember being like, how the fuck are they making these records? I do not understand this. And 30 plus years later at the gym, like I can listen to these records and they still are meaningful to me. But I'm like, okay, yeah, I see what they were doing here.
Yeah.
From a technical perspective, this makes a lot more sense to me now. Obviously, I understand what sampling is now and like what kinds of drum machines they were using, how you would blow sounds out the way they were. I mean, it must have been really fun for them to be making those records. They had to know that there was going to be some kid out there hearing them like, how are they making these records?
That's incredible, though. At 15, you were questioning that. Just the idea of how we all hear things so differently is fascinating to me, because we started dating when we were 20, 21 years old. So we've like really grown up together in a lot of ways. And it took us a while to realize we hear music so different from each other.
Yeah, yeah.
We would listen to a song and he'd be like, oh man, did you hear that bass part? And I'm like, what? No, there's a bass.
Yeah.
Because early on, I don't think I started really listening to all the parts of a recording until the last several years, because I was so focused on, I just love singing. I love the voice. So I hear the voice. And meanwhile, Aaron could tell you all the instrument parts and what happened, but he could never identify who a singer was because he didn't tune in to the voice the way I was like, how do you not know?
I heard the voice as a melody.
Yeah.
I heard it, like as
one
instrument.
part, where I heard the whole track as one thing and then the voice above everything else.
Right. When I was young, I don't know that I listened to all music that way, but remember, like rap music, hip hop, that was new technology. Just the idea that these guys were taking samples, they were basically recycling grooves or records, was really fascinating to me, because I've always been like a groove person. So if someone found like an incredible 4 bars of a song that had an amazing pocket to it, I was just like, oh, that's so good. Where did they get that? You know what I mean? And how did they do that? And this was like in that sort of golden era before sampling licensing was a thing. Those De La Soul records just got reissued.
Oh, yeah.
And those guys were in all kinds of litigation for fucking 30 something years. I think the samples were cleared long ago. I think it was probably between them and their record label. But I remember that if you were like into hip hop back then, that was like, you were trying to figure out where the samples were coming from. Those records are full of amazing samples from the weirdest places. Like those people were seriously, they were spending time in record stacks for sure. I know that listening to Paul Simon's Graceland as like a 13-year-old, 14-year-old, I was probably just like, this is awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember hearing Graceland as a kid too and just being like, what is going on? What is this mix of stuff? I'm a child of the 80s, so like the Talking Heads were on in my house a lot. And there's a similarity there between those two. Just really rhythmic. Drums are my first instrument. So obviously these records were massive. And hearing hip hop, hearing like Biggie and Tribe Called Quest and like stuff like that, kind of more not so really hard hip hop, like the more
pop leaning,
or I don't want to say soft because it's not necessarily soft either, but smoother in a way, less like super blown out records. Right. It's just, oh wow, this is what is going on. This is amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it's the biggest music in the world, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Going back to, you mentioned running and working out at the gym a lot. Is that just something that you do to take care of yourself, or does that also feel like a vital part of you to stay mentally centered? I'm curious about like the relationship of what you do to sustain your creativity and how like mental and emotional well-being feeds that,
Yeah.
as well as the creativity feeding your mental and emotional well-being.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
need to be caretaking all of it. And what's that like for you in that relationship?
And let me just say that my phone has like 10% left. So
Okay.
Cool.
I have been physical person for a long time. I never like played sports or anything as a kid, but I did a lot of independent activities. Like I was a big skateboarder, a big surfer. I spent a lot of time outside. And I don't know, I would say over like the past 15 years, maybe, like I've been trying to be more active, partially because I'm getting older and I'm interested in keeping on for as long as I can. Being a musician is really physically taxing, but the bigger part is actually the mental part. I think mentally, I know that if I've exerted myself physically, I feel better about myself. I feel like I'm taking care of myself. I feel like I've sweat the bad stuff out. It's more of a mental practice than anything else. And it's harder when I'm on the road, just because any routine is harder on the road. I still am pretty good about it on the road, but then when I'm at home, it's just part of my morning routine. So I'll drop the kids off at school and go to the gym, and I'll do an hour at the gym and then come home and I'll do yoga and sometimes kettlebells if I can convince myself to do those. I talk about how much I hate it with my friends, but I don't really hate it. I love it. It makes me feel good. And I'm a creature of routine. I have to have routine. If I just have days stretching out ahead of me with nothing in place, it's not good for me. So exercise has become even more so in the past couple of years, because I've been on this routine kind of since the gyms opened back up during COVID, after vaccines had come out. So we were like, I was going to the gym and wearing a mask at the gym. And some people are still doing that. But
Yeah.
that's a big one for me. That's a big part of my life right now.
Yeah. On the road, is it going to the gym at the hotel, or is it more like running?
Yeah, I'm more of a gym person now, because I found that I would prefer actually to be running outside, but I have found that when I'm like street running or trail running, I inevitably hurt myself in some way that like knocks me out of my routine. So being in a gym on an elliptical machine or on a treadmill is way less cool. It's way more boring, but for me, it's
Safer.
more sustainable. I can actually, like, I haven't had to stop for 6 or 9 months going to the gym 6 days a week. And when I was running, I could probably go for a couple weeks and then something would happen and I'd have to recuperate. It would take 4 or 5 days and then I'm like off my thing,
Yeah.
you know?
Unless you fall on a treadmill like I have done.
Oh, right. Right. Well, luckily, knock on wood, now that you brought that up, that may happen.
Yeah.
I didn't even know that was a possibility.
Yeah, it's pretty embarrassing, just to say the least. But
Well, as long as you didn't hurt, as long as you didn't break something.
I didn't break anything, but I did.
Broke your ego.
I broke my ego and I roughed up my knee. There's a lot of blood, so
Yeah.
it happens. But we are getting to the end anyways. But I did want to ask one last question, because I think a lot of times there's this idea of, oh, if you can write songs or if you're creative, that's your therapy. And I'm curious with other people, because I don't feel that way. I feel like writing songs is therapeutic for me, but if I'm really in the midst of shit, I can't write at all. And I have to really take care of myself and work through it in therapy and exercise and other ways that I can feel healthier. And then I have the ability and capacity and strength to work through some stuff through songs. And I'm wondering how that is for you, if you're feeling low and not as healthy in your mental and emotional well-being. Is being creative harder, or is that a way to work through it?
I like this question. Maybe a mix of both, possibly. And also, I've had a lot of issues with depression and stuff like that. And I'm actually like feeling better in the past few months than I have for like years. I'm like, oh, wow, this is what it feels like to wake up and just have your day.
Oh, that's amazing.
But yeah, sometimes songwriting can help me process. Like, I feel like this record, Quietly Blowing It, that I put out in 2021, that was like my last proper record, was a processing, even though I didn't want it to be. I was like so talking to everybody about how it wasn't a pandemic record, meaning however the world was roiling at that moment in time, whatever chaos we were experiencing collectively, I didn't want that to show up in that record. But like, you listen to it now and it's like, I can tell you when that record was made.
Yeah.
So part of that was a processing. I think there was just a lot of like trying to get through each day in my head with that record. And I feel like songwriting in that case, that being creative, having a place to go in my house where nobody else was, actually was a big part of that record. And it helped me. I think it helped me make it through that time. I would agree with you, though, that there are other times when I'm just like, there's so much chaos in my head that I'm just like, I mean, the thought of even trying to be creative there's no way that I'm going to like write anything of value. Maybe not of value. Maybe that's not the right word, but you know what I'm saying? It's just like, there's no way I could be creative right now. I'm just not feeling it. I'm not like, I don't want to sit down with an instrument. I don't want to write anything. But then like, part of it right now, just this sort of emotional maintenance for me is going to the gym, coming home, squonking around on a guitar a little bit. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Just, it's no pressure, like not putting any pressure on myself. Just kind of being gentle with myself, basically, has been a good thing to do for the past few months. I'm like enjoying that space. But, you know, as a songwriter that makes records and employs people and enjoys being on the road, there are moments where I'm like, I gotta write because I gotta make a record. And I would agree that the protection of creativity and the creative process is pretty much paramount. Let's let this thing be as untouched as we can. But at the same time, there's also, we got to make records. We got to go do this thing because it's what we do. And
Yeah, the work of it.
We can kind of complain about it, but don't complain too much because it's what you asked for.
Yeah. And it's a privilege. Yeah, it's kind of like balancing of, okay, I have this intention of I want to make a record. I got to keep the business moving.
Yeah.
And maybe that's not going to be my gentle song excavation, or maybe it will have some of those, but maybe it will have some other stuff that I push through. And that doesn't mean it's not as good or as deep, but kind of always balancing that. And like you said, being gentle with yourself of your whatever process you're currently in, I think is really essential and challenging when this is your profession.
Yeah.
Yeah. Allow the process to be what it is at the moment and allow it to develop as it is. And maybe the end result will be something that's surprising and something new. Maybe it would be like the Grateful Dead. You know, you might be resistant to the process at the moment, but you put it on, you go, oh man, this is an Iron Maiden. This is kind of cool.
Totally. The Grateful Dead is my life, basically.
Yeah.
I feel like in this crazy way with my life and my relationship to making music, our processes are just like these concentric circles, these spirals. We just kind of spiral forever. But I'm kind of like almost strangely like back to this real innocent place with...
Oh no.
I knew that was going to happen. I was having so much anxiety. I'm like, his phone is going to die.
Well, he's in an innocent place.
He is. And in the first ever for this podcast, we're going to have to wrap this up ourselves. Thanks to MC for being here with us. And as we say with most guests, we're going to have to do this again in the future.
Definitely.
With that, thanks for listening. These are the other 22 hours. See ya. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Other 22 Hours podcast. You can find more info on this episode, including links to things that we talked about, by going to theother22hours.com and clicking on episodes.
Reviews go a long way in getting our show in front of more listeners. So if you enjoyed today's episode, please take a moment to go leave a quick review wherever you listen to podcasts. And we'll see you back here next week for another episode.